All right, everybody, welcome into the Fifth Dimension podcast. And today's guest, I am joined by psychedelic integration coach Greg Lawrence. Greg, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Evan.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. And, I would love to start sort of just, where you're coming from in your background, sort of your own journey into becoming a psychedelic integration coach, because I feel like this is very much almost an up and coming field, but you don't meet too many people who are already sort of in that line of work and really make that their area of expertise, if you will. So, I'd love to hear sort of how you got involved in this community and really made this what you're doing.
Sure. I used psychedelics in my late teens through my late 20s.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, in my late 20s, I also got mixed up with hard drugs, meth specifically, and my life really spiraled out of control. I mean, I was living in a weekly motel. I had lost my job. I was pretty much at the end of my rope.
Hmm.
I managed to get pulled out of there. I was actually rescued by my parents. So
Hmm.
I was able to move away from where I was, move to a different area. I quit everything cold turkey, every substance, including psychedelics, except cannabis, which I abused for another 20 years or so.
Hmm.
And then about 7 years ago, my life was turned upside down. My wife at the time passed away unexpectedly.
Hmm.
And when that happened, I was thrown into grief. And during that period, I realized there was a lot of childhood trauma I had not yet dealt with. In fact, I specifically had tried not to deal with it for a good 40 years.
Right.
So I sought out the help of a psychotherapist and a coach. I was someone who works pretty much like I do, except not in psychedelic integration. And during that time, I tried psilocybin because I was smoking cigarettes and I heard that would help with smoking cessation. I did some mushrooms and was able to see how some things were in my life and what had caused me to act in certain ways and patterns and habits that I had. And I thought, wow, now everything's going to be fixed. And in a few weeks, I was right back where I started.
Right.
That happened a few more times with some epiphanies and aha moments and realizations and memories and things like that. So I started looking into it and I found the concept of psychedelic integration, meaning you take those insights, those lessons, and there's always a lesson in the psychedelic experience. You
Hmm.
take those lessons and somehow integrate them into your daily life. Basically, you make some shift or change. It can be minor, but something has to change a little bit based on what you learned.
Hmm.
I found psychedelic integration circles in my area. I started attending those. I was asked probably about 4 years ago if I would start leading those circles. I still do that to this day in Los Angeles. I facilitate psychedelic integration circles along with some other friends of mine.
Hmm.
During that time as a facilitator, people would ask me for advice, and I was doing some sort of ad hoc coaching with people. I was doing energy work. I was doing the same thing then. And then one of the integration coaches I knew asked me if I could start seeing some of the clients that they weren't able to see. After that, I got certified as an integration coach, and I've been doing that full time for a little over 2 years now. So basically, I do this because it helped me. I was a different person 6 years
Right.
ago. I was a very angry, impatient. I was not good in relationships. I was quite a different person. The work that I've done, part of which was due to psychedelics, has helped me really transform my life. So um, I'm here to see that other people have that same opportunity.
Right. And that's really beautiful. And, I can definitely relate in the sense of the power and like transformative aspect of psychedelics. I think the first time I ever used them, it was very much sort of in that recreational, like fun, like, oh, let's go and take some LSD and have a good time and all of that. And so I've had that experience, but any sort
Beautiful
of,
experience, by the way.
right. Oh, definitely. Definitely
Yeah,
wonderful.
I
And,
am not someone who is anti recreational use of psychedelics, by the way.
right. And I'm also on the same boat. I think that can be, in a great setting, that can be a great experience. But then there's
Absolutely.
also like you spoke of, sort of the integration, and you can almost make it like a ritualistic experience, if you will. And I found that is where, if you really go in with the intention of healing or just growth and learning, you can just get sort of a different understanding, if you will, on where you were. Like you're looking at yourself from like you know, from like a bird's eye point of view, I guess, on your own life. And it's I think that can be so powerful. Um, and with the integration process in terms of I don't think that idea of ritual and integration, it's not necessarily as like we hear about like psychedelics, being an up and coming field, but I don't always hear about people talking about that integration process and that taking it in a ritualistic or medicinal sense. I mean, do you think that, like, in terms of like medicine, psychedelics is going to be sort of almost a future, or maybe in whether it be counseling, psychotherapy, that field?
Oh, I absolutely do. This is what they were known to be useful for in the 40s, 50s, and 60s before they
Mhm.
were made illegal. There was a lot of LSD therapy and psychedelic psychotherapy going on at the time. It was, MDMA was used for couples therapy at the time. They were well known to help with things like addictions and changing behaviors and certain psychological conditions. That's one of the things they were best known for before they sort of escaped from the lab and the
Yeah,
academic institutions. But yeah,
right.
psychedelics are actually absolutely going to be a very vital part of the future of psychology.
Right. How do you think we like change almost, is it just through education that we're going to change the stigma? Because a lot of times if you're, you know, especially people maybe in your age bracket, there's a lot of the like the I guess propaganda that was put out against it, especially back in the day when it was first making the rounds amongst the population. There was a big pushback. Is it just sort of about that education and a willingness to explore this field, especially by people who don't know about it and have that sort of stigma?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of education, a matter of getting that information, proper information into people's hands.
Right.
So, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, went a long way towards doing that because here's someone who was not an advocate of psychedelics, who was well known in the mainstream, a good storyteller and a good writer, talking about his experience. So people were able to absorb that more than say, you send them a Terrence McKenna video, they might not listen as readily as they would to someone like that. But the more that we hear everyday people more or less tell their stories about how psychedelics have helped them, the more acceptance we'll see in the mainstream. Ayelet Waldman's book, A Very Good Day, about microdosing. Same thing. Here's someone who's a well-known author who comes out and says, hey, these things help me with crippling depression and anxiety.
Mm,
So yeah, the more stories we hear from people, the more clinical studies we hear about, the more success stories we hear about, the more harm reduction information we get into people's hands and talk about responsible use,
right.
the more
Def-
acceptance we'll see amongst the mainstream, I think.
Definitely. And I've definitely had to sort of, at first, I was reluctant to sort of come out of that. It's almost like a psychedelic closet, if you will, where you're using it without necessarily telling others out of the fear of that judgment, or it's like, oh, you use psychedelics. Oh, that is, and it's sort of people having that stigma. But in order to break past the stigma, there does need to be that openness and that um, just the open discussion, like you were saying. And you mentioned microdosing. I mean, do you have particular experience microdosing yourself? I mean, it's something that I've done in the past. And I think when we talk about microdosing, again, not a lot of people might like, they might have heard of it, but you don't have the trip. It's not like you're going and tripping. So, I mean, have you used microdosing in the past? And is that something you integrate within your circle?
Uh, I've used microdosing myself. I work with a lot of clients who are microdosing, and that's actually one of the ways that people are coming into the psychedelic fold, if you will, is that I take part in quite a few online forums and Facebook groups that are dedicated to the subject of microdosing, and there are new people coming in every day trying
Mm,
to get help with weaning off of antidepressants, trying to get help with depression, anxiety, OCD, people with traumatic brain injury, ADHD. There are all kinds of people coming in finding that taking subperceptual amounts of psychedelics, that means you have no psychoactive effects. You might just feel good, better, or not as bad. Helps to elevate mood, give you more energy, improve concentration and focus. That's where it became originally known for, like a thing that they do in Silicon Valley.
yeah.
These guys are doing it, for productivity reasons. Then it turns out that there are very medicinal applications for this, especially when it comes to mental health. But microdosing is definitely one way that people are finding out about psychedelics.
Right. Definitely.
But
And I
yeah, I
would,
found it to be very useful for myself. Like you can do a tiny bit of LSD or a tiny bit of mushrooms, and then a few hours later, just realize you're having a good day and not really, sort of forget that you even took it.
right. Definitely. It's like that little added boost, like you said. And I think, especially in terms of mental health, I think we definitely need to be exploring new ways to, treat mental health and new ways to really, find a lot of the answers. Because, if we look at things like depression and anxiety and, suicide, of course, it's those numbers are only continuing to go up. And you have to wonder if the system that we have in place, um, not that it doesn't mean it's doing more harm than good, but there has to be improvements to that. And so I think um, psychedelics and microdosing is a perfect example of, just new treatments, new ways of um, exploring this. I mean, of course, the legality of psychedelics right now makes it a very difficult area to explore for a lot of people. I mean, is there like ways of like to find psychedelic communities or because of that legality? I mean, I myself have found it difficult to really explore it in larger groups just where I've been. I'm sure if you're in a place like Los Angeles, it might be able to find that community. But I mean, what's your experience in terms of just that community aspect and how you manage with the legality and all of that sort of side of things? Because I feel like it can get a little sticky if it's not. I don't know. I don't know exactly how I'm trying to phrase that, but I think you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I'm in Los Angeles, so people might say like you live in a bubble. Well, that's great. I like being in a bubble. I don't mind at all that there's a certain political view and a certain strata of people that I hang out with. That's fine with me. I
Right.
don't feel limited. But when I start the integration circles at the beginning, I often ask how many people are new here, and hands go up, and I say, how many people found us by going to Meetup and typing in the word psychedelic? Most of their hands go up.
Yeah.
So that's a good place to start off. You go to
Okay.
Facebook, you go to Meetup, you look in your area, you type in the word psychedelic. There are psychedelic support groups and societies all over the country right now, and more of them are popping up all the time. Those are good places to start off to get an idea of the culture and get to know people in that community and find out if they are, like your tribe.
Right.
At the time when I came in, that ended up being what happened with me. That was the place where I felt comfortable. Those were the people that I sort of gelled with. And they have a lot of other interests besides psychedelics, but that became sort of my tribe.
Right.
As far as the legality, for the most part right now, at least in the bubble areas like here, the only time you hear about someone being arrested for something like mushrooms is if they do something stupid,
Yeah.
or if you read about an arrest where it says they recovered, 4 kilos of cocaine and a half an ounce of mushrooms that just happened to be there. It's not
Right.
like the police were trying to track down the guy who had a half ounce of mushrooms.
Right.
I think there's as much emphasis on that right now as there is on things like, cannabis, which is legal here. But, there was a time when cannabis was kind of like, yeah, we get it. You guys are smoking weed, just stay out of the way and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I was
At
gonna.
the time right now, that's sort of what it's like. You see some incidental arrests and you see things like people trying to advertise openly that we are selling these substances. That just happened in Northern California not long ago with a church that was selling cannabis and then decided we're going to sell mushrooms now because it's been decriminalized. Well, decriminalized is not legalized. And if
Right.
you start making money from these things and letting the government know that I'm making money and not giving you your cut, then you might be in for some trouble.
Right.
But the guy who's buying a quarter ounce of mushrooms or getting a couple of tabs of LSD to microdose, for the most part, the police are going to kind of turn their eye unless they're doing something else. That's what's going on right now. That doesn't mean people should let their guard down. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be efforts to further decriminalize and or legalize or medicalize whatever your opinion has to be or happens to be. Those
Right.
efforts should continue. But for right now, I don't think that there are too many, detectives in the police department trying to track down the people who are buying some mushrooms for personal use or the person who's selling it to people they know.
Right, definitely. And I would agree with you. I was going to make the analogy. It almost feels like cannabis, like how cannabis was 5, 10 years ago. And you see the progress that's really been made in terms of public opinion. There's often that I find it interesting that if you look at like politics, you have the divide on like the left like, is support and the right, but now it's sort of on both sides. There's kind of both support cannabis, and I think we're going to sort of see the same route take place with psychedelics. It's just going to sort of require us to carve out that path and allow it to play out because we see places like I think Denver and it might be the whole state of Oregon, if I'm not mistaken, has decriminalized psilocybin. So um, just a matter of time because I think we're seeing those medicinal benefits being proven by science. Like the science wasn't always soundly there. Like there were a few studies, but we're seeing more and more studies come out. I think John Hopkins has a facility where they do solely psychedelic studies, and they're doing research on it as we speak, which is beautiful to think about. Um, I mean, I'd love to hear about for people who maybe have experience in psychedelics And in just like maybe a recreational sense, or in like a sense of exploring it within oneself, what the difference might be between, a guided psychedelic experience versus maybe just a recreational trip, and what sort of the differences you focus on in that.
Well, in a more therapeutic setting, one thing that is possible, well, I should start off by saying that the whole idea of a bad trip is due to a few things.
Hmm.
Sometimes that's due to people who should not be doing psychedelics. Those are people with a history or family history of things like schizophrenia, psychosis, any kind of hallucination, certain bipolar disorders. People are taking certain medications like mood stabilizers, like lithium. So
Hmm.
there are certain people who should not work with psychedelics because they're already a little bit untethered from reality and don't need to be further untethered. Most of us need to kind of, get unstuck and loosen up. Some people don't need to loosen up more. They're already loosened up and they actually need to tighten up a little bit in
Hmm.
order to function a little bit better. That's one reason. The other reason is that psychedelics do what therapy does. They bring the unconscious to the conscious. So there are experiences, memories, feelings, thoughts that we all have that we're trying not to feel, not to experience. We're trying to just push them down and keep them below the surface because we really don't want to deal with those. They're very disturbing at one time. They are taboo sometimes. You can't have feelings of hatred towards certain people. That doesn't feel right. You can't be angry about certain things because anger can be frightening. If we're used to staying away from mad and sad. So a lot of the stuff is bubbling under the surface. You go to therapy, and after a few months, you might break down crying in the therapist's office or feel really shitty at the end of a therapy session.
Right.
That's just what happens when you bring these things up. Psychedelics do that rapidly.
Mm.
So I'm sitting here and I'm expecting to feel like one with mankind and expect to feel singularity. And boom, all of a sudden I'm thinking about something really unpleasant from my childhood. I don't know why that's happening. I think that something's wrong with the substance and I'm having a bad trip and I'm just trying to stop it. And now I'm in real trouble because trying to stop these things when they're coming up is a sure way to make them keep coming at you.
Mm.
So a lot of bad trips come from people not being prepared for the fact that disturbing material might come up. It's coming up because it wants to be felt, experienced, and processed. Emotions have a beginning, middle, and end. There's an arc. We put a lot
Right.
of them away when they get to here before they finish. Human body is not meant to be a storehouse for unprocessed emotions and memories and experiences. Pretty soon it gets a little bit too full, and it's like when that closet's full and you're trying to hold the door shut, or else it's going to blast open and throw everything out at you.
Right.
So now I'm experiencing anxiety, depression, OCD. I feel stuck in my life. I don't know what's bothering me. I'm not good in relationships. All kinds of things happen. In a therapeutic setting, one of the things that you do is you prepare someone for that eventuality. So in a guided session, a couple things are going to happen. Someone's going to hopefully prepare you and tell you what might happen and how to best deal with whatever comes up, how to get the most out of the session, how to stay grounded, navigate what to do if things become difficult. Your role, the guide's role. The idea is for you to have you to be armed with information and be with someone who is not tethered to you by any past experiences or feelings. This should not be someone that I have some conflict with in the past or who I have certain feelings about, because that stuff's going to come up during the journey if that person's there. So it should be sort of a neutral party who knows when to intervene and when not to intervene. What should be happening for you, what shouldn't be happening for you, when to let you go and when to step in and calm things down. Those
Mm.
are very important things for a guide to know. It's going to be therapeutic in the sense that certain things might come up and they're there for you to process. When you
Right.
go for one, if you're in one of these clinical trials that you see around the country, one of the first things they're going to tell you is if you become frightened of something, the best thing you can do is to lean into it. It's going to be a short time. It's going to be very frightening because if something happened in my past, when I remember it during the psychedelic experience, I don't get to look back with the benefit of hindsight and say, oh, I get it. That wasn't that scary. I was just a 5-year-old kid. I'm going to feel the same fear that I would have when I was 5 years old.
Mm.
I just need to know it's not going to last. It needs to come out and wants to be experienced. And once I do experience it, I'm going to feel much better. There's going to be less pressure on me. I'm going to be carrying around less psychological garbage.
Right. Definitely. If we choose to never feel those things, we can ultimately never heal them. So it's that I can definitely relate in the sense that what you can perceive as a bad trip is really almost just an unpacking of what we've been holding on to for so long. And I've had a lot of uh, friends tell me stories about like bad trips and all of that, but I've come to the conclusion that there really is no bad trip. It's just the unprepared factor, like you said. And this integration circle, like you're talking about, is very much, as you're talking about it, it reminds me of, reading about a lot of ancient cultures that, down in like the Amazon, for example, that will have, they've been doing ayahuasca down there for hundreds of thousands of years. And, it's a, they sort of explore inward inside in like the inward realms, and with the guide of a shaman, with the guide of, um, with the intention of healing and exploring and discovering. So if anything, it feels like the integration circle. It's almost like a return to uh, a practice that is very ancient, a practice that how we're supposed to be using. I mean, like you said, we're not against recreational trips by any means, but how we can really use these medicines with intent and with purpose, and really connect to a deeper part of ourselves that I think a lot of us don't even necessarily know consciously exists. Um, and I don't know if you wanted to speak on that, and if it's, I mean, have you experienced any, or any thoughts on like how it relates to ancient cultures, or what your thoughts are on that?
Well, I think it's difficult to move from the very segregated kind of civilization we live in right now into more of a tribal feel, but um, there's certainly, what am I looking for here? There's certainly movement in that direction when it comes to things like integration circles or in the psychedelic community in general. There is
Right.
a feeling of a tribe and a feeling of support and a feeling that, it's a universal experience. When
Right.
people haven't worked with psychedelics, I tell them there's no way to tell you what it's going to be like. But once you've been there, then you see someone else who's been there. You're like, yeah, I've been there. I know it was completely different from you. It was nothing like what I experienced, but at the same time, it was the same thing. I've
Right.
had that experience and I understand it now.
Right.
So there is some camaraderie amongst people in the psychedelic community. There is also this sense of we are working towards something greater than ourselves. We're working towards ourselves as a civilization, as a society, as a species, to try to become better and better with each other, better individually. But I'd also like to back up just to your point about bad trips, because I believe it was Zendo Project, their harm reduction organization, which a long time ago said something like, you know, even bad trips can be made into just difficult experiences when provided with context.
Right.
So this sort of got shortened in the psychedelic community, people saying there's no such thing as a bad trip, even correcting people who say, I've had a bad trip, and they say there's no such thing as a bad trip. So I can't think of any other area in life where I get to characterize what happened to someone. If I say
Mm.
I have a bad childhood, someone can't tell me, no, it's just a difficult upbringing.
Right.
You're
That's a good
looking
point.
at it wrong. So,
Right.
if there's any place where I think we should back up and not try to characterize someone else's experience and tell them what it is or isn't, I would say it's probably in this community where we're trying to accept
Mm.
everyone's point of view and just help them take that bad trip, because, some pretty hairy shit can happen during a psychedelic experience. People have named it one of the 5 most psychologically difficult experiences of their life. So it's not easy,
Right.
and it can be bad for some people. You want to take that bad and do something with it.
Mm.
But yeah, at the time, there's no way that that can feel less than bad sometimes when you are crying your eyes out, going through some terrible emotion from the past, or being pursued by some feeling that you've been fighting off for years.
Right. No, that's a great point. And I think when I said there's no bad trip, it's in that context that it can be used to create something like better from it, and like really learn and grow from it. Cause
Yeah.
you're right, it can be absolutely terrifying in the experience itself. And, good, bad, those are all really just subjective terms. And everybody's going to have their own unique experience, which I think honoring that and respecting that, especially in the psychedelic community, is important. So,
One of the reasons I bring that up is because after being at integration circles, I
mhm,
guess I should say what those are, by the way. Those are safe spaces where people gather to talk about their experiences, ask questions, do research. So they're safe spaces to discuss psychedelics and the psychedelic experience.
mhm,
We have new people coming in all the time. And one of the first things I started hearing from people was, yeah, I'm really sorry I was using these recreationally before. I know I'm not supposed to. because recreational became a sort of a pejorative in our community for a while, and then people started pushing back against it, saying we're supposed to be learning how to enjoy our lives. Why are we not allowing people to enjoy their life through the lens of a psychedelic and go to a museum or enjoy another person's body or some food or some music or whatever it is? And the
Right.
other thing is, people would say, yeah, I know there's no such thing as a bad trip, so I'm not sure how to put this, but I was kind of scared. So people feel sort of shamed by these things, and we need to open up, I think, and make people know, let people know that all experiences are welcome. Your characterization of your experiences is what you say it is. We're not going to tell you what to do or what that was or what it really was or what it really was or was not.
Right. That's a beautiful point. And I think a lot of times one of the things that I've learned through psychedelics is the amount of, judgment that we're really taught to just live in, like with, just in our upbringings, we learn different judgments and hold different um, ideas about ourselves and other people. And I think it's easy to sort of bring that within psychedelics almost unconsciously, even if, we do sort of gain a new, uh, revelations about how it is that we've just about ourselves in the world in general, but it can be easy to bring that sort of unconscious judgment about the experience, about how we're supposed to be using it, and just instead of almost just an acceptance of let's just accept everything as it is in this space. It's safe, transparent, like embracing vulnerability. I think that can be a really difficult thing to do, um, especially if you're new into a community, new into like a circle. If you're in there your first time, it's going to be very difficult to open up and be vulnerable about your experiences. But just that the emphasis on safety, like you mentioned, and the emphasis on openness, I think can really make the psychedelic community stand out from a lot of other communities. And I think in a lot of ways it already does, because it's so open-minded and so explorative and welcoming of all different backgrounds, and welcoming of, it doesn't matter who you are. I'm sure you could attest to this within your community. You have people coming from every single direction, like it regardless of age, gender, race, and all of the different things that are typically can be seen as like dividers, if you will. But I'm sure within the community it's diverse.
It is, let's make no mistake, it's still largely white dudes. Okay, so we can go a long way towards being more inclusive, but there are a lot of problems within that. You know,
Yeah.
people of color don't have the same experience that I do because they have to worry about what they have on them when they're driving in their car in case they get pulled over. Because while authorities might turn a blind eye to whatever I'm doing, because I'm a 60-year-old white guy, 30-year-old black guy driving through my neighborhood's not going to get that same slack. So
Mm,
that guy can be arrested for a small amount of psychedelics where I might be allowed to slide.
mm,
So we all need to be working towards making sure that people have more access, that there are more that there is a more just way of treating them. They're being treated fairly by law enforcement and government officials, and that we are actually an inclusive community. That we're not having conferences where there's 9 white guys speaking and 1 woman because we thought it'd be a good idea to put a Hispanic woman in there.
right. Right.
So yeah, it is an inclusive community, but we have a ways to go as far as the level of diversity within that community.
Right. That makes
But I
sense.
will say, as far as what you said about judgment, um, sometimes I think there is an over exuberance as far as how we do psychedelics and what they're supposed to do to sort of rush people on their healing path. Like, wow, you're not taking enough. They're supposed to be more therapeutic. You shouldn't be using those, therapeutic. You shouldn't be using those recreationally. We have a lot of judgment about how people are using substances that have a far greater intelligence in many ways than we do.
Right.
If we knew exactly how we were supposed to do psychedelics, we wouldn't have to ask psychedelics for certain answers. These are substances that have been around long before us and are still very much a mystery to us in many ways. So I don't think it's up to us to pronounce how they're supposed to be used, in what context, what kind of respect someone's supposed to have, what kind of reverence or what sort of setting they should be used in. To me, once you get past safe and responsible, which means I'm not going to harm myself or other people, then it's pretty much up to me how I engage with psychedelics. I have my own opinions and I have my own beliefs, but it's not up to me to tell people how they're supposed to approach these things.
Right. It's going to be different for every individual.
Absolutely.
What works for you is going to be maybe completely different for somebody else, and and vice versa. And uh, I think that's a very open and respectable thing to keep in mind within these communities. And you spoke of the psychedelics having a greater intelligence than us, and I definitely agree. Um, for did you want do you want to like elaborate on that? Because I think like it's a profound like concept, but I definitely like relate to what you're saying. But what are your thoughts on sort of the intelligence and like the greater like wisdom of psychedelics and these plants that have been around for thousands of years?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's a mystery to me, but I do know that there is, you know, everything is here. I am in this room with these objects talking to you over these waves in the air, and everything is moving.
Mhm.
Everything is energy. There is a motion to everything. So, what's making everything move? What is the canvas that we're all painted on? What is space? It's not nothing. There's not nothing there. So there is something besides us, outside us, some might say greater than us, that's behind everything here. Those are included. And they seem to have some sort of intelligence that helps us plug in and see what's going on within us. Because one thing that's not clear a lot of times is a lot of the things that happen in psychedelics come from us.
Yeah.
I don't think that a mushroom can see what's going on with me. A mushroom gives me the ability to plug in and see there's that thing that I've been trying to deal with. Here's that
Mm,
subject that I need to think about. Here's a point of view that I wasn't allowed to have through the sort of limited perspective I have in my human experience. So I don't know what that intelligence is, but I think that somehow it's connected to this other thing that's behind everything that's here,
right.
because it certainly helps me plug into that sense of being beyond myself, of being something more than a body, of being something more than what I consider to be an ego, which might not even be there.
Right.
But there's something at work that I'm not able to identify. And I think it feels like to me that psychedelics are somehow connected to that or somehow plug me into that.
Right. It's they sort of give that greater awareness of like an infinite intelligence that exists. It exists beyond the self, right? And it's the universe, like you said, and like all of that, like space. It's I don't view it as nothing either. I view it almost as infinite. Like there is an infinite amount of possibilities and for whether it be the self or just evolution in general. And I think psychedelics really tap into that nature, and it reminds me a lot about like philosophies of like Terence McKenna and a lot of what he would speak on, and those sort of ideas. And I think listeners engaging who are really intrigued by that, I would definitely encourage some Terence McKenna because he has some great insights on that. And it really, tapping into sort of this infinite intelligence makes me think about how we can use that intelligence to really, I guess you could say, transcend a lot of the old belief systems that we hold, not just individually, but sort of collectively, in a lot of the old ways that we have been living as a collective, and like finding sort of the solutions to a lot of the problems that we're facing. And um, I think that it could like even if doesn't mean everybody has to go and use psychedelics by any means, but just accessing that same sort of intelligence and accessing that there is something greater beyond the individual self can really uh, put into perspective a lot of the issues we're dealing with in our communities and issues that um, generally come from just the way humans are organizing themselves. I don't know if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I mean, what are your thoughts on that and like using it to create a better world, create a better society and community? And um,
Well, I mean, one of the first things I would say was that psychedelics are not for everyone.
yeah,
There are certain memes that go around saying things like everyone should do LSD or cops need to do ayahuasca. Well, there
right.
are a lot of racist, misogynist, white nationalists who do psychedelics and have their worldview strengthened
Mm,
by the experience. So it has a lot to do with intention and what you're trying to do. Like people say something like, Trump should do psychedelics. Well, Trump might come out even worse on the other side. There's no
oh, can you
guarantee.
imagine?
Psychedelics will not change someone who doesn't want to be changed. So psychedelics are just not going to be for everyone anyway. I don't think there's anything that's for everyone. There's
Right.
certainly a tool that can be used. But as far as using them to solve problems, in my opinion, the first step is for people to, in whatever tools, whatever path they're choosing, whatever modalities they're working with, is first to try to figure out what a problem is for them. What I usually tell clients in coaching is, look, when you start off on this path, you might have 65 problems. And you look out. And after a while, you're going to have 62, and you're going to have 57, you're going to have 51, you're going to have 48. And before you know it, you might have 34 problems. And nothing outside of you has changed. Everything is still there exactly as it was. What's changed is your perception of what is a problem. One of the most amazing realizations that people can have during a psychedelic experience, and it's a kind of a common one, is when someone says, oh my God, I just realized there's not really a problem. It's the way that I'm thinking about things. When there is not danger in front of you, then there's not a problem. But the human mind always wants to tell you that something's wrong and something has to be changed. So I think the first step is for people to figure out what's really a problem. Because if I think that there are 72 problems out there, I'm going to waste my time trying to solve about half of them when they're not really problems. All right, so I need to figure out first what's really a problem. I also need to figure out that there's not a problem in having a problem. We are going to have problems. If we make that a problem, that's a neurosis. Now I have a problem that I have problems. And I'm not working on my problems because I'm busy working on the problem of having problems. It gets multi-layered at some point. But I think the first part is for me to figure out that I don't have 72 problems, I have 38, because if I have 38 problems and you have 38 problems, and we both had 72 problems before, there are many fewer problems in the world than there were before when you had 72 and I had 72. And now we can sort of turn our attention to what is really a problem. What's a problem for me? Now what's a problem for society? But if we're not sure what is a problem because we are looking through a distorted lens, we're trying to put out fires that aren't that dangerous.
Right. I think that's a great point. And when we look at the world through a distorted lens, a lot of times it's coming from, our background that we were raised in, or judgments that we're holding, or judgments we have about ourselves. And, just really honing in and almost listening just inward, listening to, not necessarily turning off the mind. I don't think that's possible, but just listening to what it is that our feelings are telling us and what we're seeing, and sort of trusting that inner voice to really hone in on what the focus should be. And I think psychedelics can be a tool to help people do that. But I mean, you can also engage in meditation and yoga, and there's all these great mindfulness practices to really just help explore these different areas and um, confront the problems. Because I love what you said about coming to the realization that there's not a problem in having a problem. Like, I think a lot of times that our whether it's our ego or self-esteem, like, we don't want to acknowledge we may have some issues that we're to deal with, or just things that are coming up. Because I mean, that's part of the human experience. It's part of being here, like in the 21st century. Like, we look at the world today, people have things to deal with, like, that's okay. And I think when we can acknowledge that, it puts us in a better place for healing, and whatever the healing path is going to be. We don't need to necessarily rush through it and heal everything by tomorrow, but just acknowledge that, all right, it's okay to have this problem. And, a lot of times there are going to be people who have had a similar problem. So it can be really helpful, even if feels vulnerable, to speak out about it and, seek support, which I think, I love the psychedelic, like, circle that you have, because I think that's a place um, that can be that support. I've attended a couple of times back when I lived in New Hampshire. I don't live there anymore. They had this great men's circle where, you'd just go and you'd speak openly with other men about, hey, this is what we're feeling. This is how I'm feeling, a little vulnerable. Let's just talk about things as a group of people, and, offer some advice, wisdom, just support. And I think that's so powerful. And we've almost lost touch with the power of, like, true connection and true tribe, because I think a lot of times we hide our vulnerabilities and the parts of ourselves that we often feel like we need to be ashamed of or scared of, in terms of that. But I think psychedelics can really, that at least the community can offer just such a beautiful benefit to a lot of people. And I don't know, I think we need more community immersed without, obviously the United States is so huge, but you can't have everybody in the same community. But you just have a bunch of different smaller communities can really create positive change. at the individual level and collective level.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. So in terms of like the integration process, I don't know if we spoke too much in depth about like what does it look like? Let's say, you have this psychedelic experience in a circle. What does like the following weeks, days, the actual like integrating of the experience look like? I mean, it's going to be different for everybody, but is there some like common principles or like guidelines that you would keep in mind for that? And can this be something that's done for somebody who is maybe just going to have like a solo trip that they're using with intention, or a recreational trip?
Oh, I work with people all the time who had no intention to have a therapeutic experience and had one.
Hmm.
I get a lot of calls from people who had difficult experiences or bad trips. And I get calls from people who are, I regularly work with people before and after an experience. So I work
Hmm.
in preparation sessions to teach people how to get the most out of the session. And then afterwards to sort of distill their lesson or theme and figure out how they want to integrate that, what sort of shift or change they want to make. And I use, parts of cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic program, a number of different personal and spiritual development practices to help people make changes or shifts to have new habits, patterns, ways of being and thinking, and sort of prune the old ones that weren't serving them very well. How that looks different depending on who you talk to. So there is a school of thought within the integration community, I'll say, that this is something that needs to take its own course. It's sort of a non-directive coaching approach of I'm just going to ask some questions and see what you come up with and let you have the answer. And that may take quite a bit of time, but it's a natural process where things are going to come up. My philosophy is that there is a period of neuroplasticity in the aftermath of a psychedelic experience. That is your brain's willingness to make new connections, new neural pathways, new habits, patterns, ways of being and thinking. There is an area, there's a time there that can be capitalized on. I've just had an experience and I've gotten a message from myself, maybe outside myself, that this is something, it's often something like, I didn't know that was bothering me so much. I didn't know that was as important to me. I didn't know that was affecting me so seriously. I
Hmm.
didn't know that this thing in my life doesn't work for me or fit for me right now. So after the experience, and we have to figure out what does that mean? So if it's my job, I'm not getting along at my job. Is that me? I'm having trouble relating to people, or am I in a line of work that is not rewarding for me? And maybe I need to experiment with that. Maybe I need to look at alternatives. Is it my relationship? Is it, if it is it the way that I'm acting? Is it the way the other person's acting? Is it something that we need to work on together? It's going to show you areas of your life that you need to, that are going to trigger you, they're going to upset you,
Hmm.
that are going to show you this is something that needs to be worked on. I don't see any problem with taking that aftermath when you have that plasticity in the brain, that neuroplasticity. You have that lesson, you have an idea of what I might do, of using some tools at our disposal and making some changes to take you towards that. That's not the entire experience, but I'm doing something proactive after the experience based on the message or lesson that I got. So I'm now making that message or lesson a part of my daily life by making some change or shift. To
Hmm.
me, that's one way of integrating the experience.
Right.
And in my opinion, you're in a space with expanded awareness and consciousness up here when you're on psychedelics. Then you come back down here, and it's like putting a golf ball through a garden hose. It's not going to fit in here anymore. That's why
Right.
there's some things we don't remember, we don't understand. They made sense at the time. Wow, that was really important at the time. And now it just seems like, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
Um, but if you integrate, if you take those lessons and if you do integrate them and make them a part of your life and make some shift or change in accordance with the message that you got, what you were telling yourself you wanted to do, more of that will slide down. You can keep getting lessons from this for years and years from one experience. And to me, if you don't integrate, if you just keep going back, because that's what some people do, you're going to hit a wall after a while. You're not going to get much from it, or you're just going to keep doing it. If you do psychedelics without integrating, you're just having a one-time experience over and over again. And that's fine if that's what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that. But psychedelics don't necessarily change us. They provide us with an opportunity to change and show us where we might want to work on our lives.
Hmm. Right.
So to me, integration is about doing that work in the aftermath. That's what I do with clients. I help them set up a framework and say, look, this is the thing I want to change. They say, this is the thing I want to change. Okay, here's what you need to do then. You're going to have to act in some ways that are a little bit challenging. You're going to be pushing a little bit. They're going to be a little uncomfortable for you because this is not what you're used to. This is past the sort of a limitation you have right now. There's a reason that you're locked into the behavior that you have now, and making some changes is going to be a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit of a stretch for you. But if you keep doing it, it's going to get more comfortable. It's going to feel more normal. There's a muscle memory that has to be built up there. If I'm not used to setting boundaries for myself, it's going to be very uncomfortable the first time I set a boundary.
Right.
If I'm not used to making my needs and wants known, I'm going to feel very selfish the first time I do it. Like, oh, this is all about me. This isn't right. I don't need that. It's okay. We can do what you want to do. So
Right.
breaking out of those habits and patterns can be very uncomfortable and be a stretch for people.
Right. So it's about taking those action steps, if you will, after the experiments based on, sort of the message, the wisdom that you pick up from it. Because you're definitely right. It's interesting because, it makes me think about the first time I ever took psychedelics and, what the experience was. And then, I didn't really focus on any of the integration, the wisdom, or like it was just sort of like, oh, that was cool. And then, the next time I did it, it was almost a similar experience in a sense, but sort of the same feelings came up, the same like it was almost more intensified, if you will. So then it was sort of it's like, okay, I'm gonna actually like analyze this a little bit deeper than the last time. So, it's I think, the psychedelic experience, it's less of like the importance almost feels less on the experience itself, but the opportunity to change afterwards, like you mentioned, that's sort of where the real growth, the real learning, and um, I guess you could say, not to say that the psychedelic experience doesn't have meaning, but sort of the deeper meaning can really come from the integration and changes you make in your daily life, and that's why I'm such an advocate, myself for psychedelics now, and just the uh, overall getting people comfortable talking about them, getting people familiar that this isn't just some thing hippies do in the grass and sit and listen to music and go to the Grateful Dead and all that. It's like a real tool for growth and real tool for change. And I think we have to be willing to face being uncomfortable in order to change. So and psychedelics experiences themselves can be uncomfortable, but the action steps afterwards, as long as we keep pushing ourselves, getting familiar with being uncomfortable becomes less uncomfortable. So you know, it's all about that growth, that change.
Absolutely, yeah. A lot of us spend our lives trying not to be uncomfortable, trying to make sure no one else is upset. We're trying to control things.
Yeah.
And that leads us to a place of looking for some kind of healing because we can't control things as much as we'd like to think that we can.
I was gonna say psychedelics shows us that we have no control whatsoever. And
Well, that's where our control lies. Our control is in letting go of control.
yeah,
There is a lot to realizing that there's nothing that I need to do and nothing that has to be fixed. When that overarching sense in me that something needs to be different, something needs to change, something needs to be fixed, if I let that go, now I kind of have the energy to address things that I might want to change or fix or make different.
right. It's that almost that contentment, with what is and embracing, accepting,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
ultimately loving that. Awesome. So, Greg, I mean, we hit on a lot of great topics, pretty much covered everything that I had in mind for this, and we're approaching about an hour. Is there anywhere that you would want to send the listeners, one, to, interact with your work and, some of the great things that you're doing with your circle, but also just resources on, psychedelics as well? Just kind of, a couple different directions they could go.
Yeah, I have a resources page on my website, which is psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. You can always get me, Greg, at psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com, and find me Psychedelic Integration Specialist on Facebook.
Right.
And I talk about a lot of different topics. I usually am posting things that have to do with psychedelics and what's happening with them right now. I interact with a lot of people. So always happy to answer questions.
All right, sweet. Yeah, I would encourage all the listeners to head on over there, and I'll put the links to all of that in my episode description so they can just scroll on down and click the link and find you that way. Um, So Greg, this is a great chat. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. And, I think we'll definitely have to do it again sometime in the near future, talk a little bit more in depth about psychedelics. Because as time goes on, I really view this as um, like it's going to evolve just like cannabis did, like we mentioned earlier. And that really excites me.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, it's been great talking to you, Evan. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. And I'll let you know when I get the episode out. It should be out within a week or so. And I'll shoot you an email with the link and everything, and we'll go from there.
I'll put it up on social media.
All
Cool.
right.
All
Sounds
right.
good.
All right. Thanks, man.
All right. Yeah, no problem. Have a great rest of the day.
You too.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.